Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this side event on seizing ecolabelling and sustainable public procurement opportunities, organised by the Nordic Council of Ministers. My name is Robert Watt. I'm Director of Communications at Stockholm Environment Institute, and I'd like to give you a very warm welcome to a hugely distinguished panel and room of experts. I can see many familiar faces here. Really looking forward to this side event, which has the largest number of ministers that I've ever had the pleasure of trying to moderate and keep time with. This session has got various elements, and I'll just run through the programme very quickly for you. We're going to have an opening address from the Norwegian Minister for the Environment. Then we will have a keynote speech from UNEP, talking about the synergies between sustainable public procurement and ecolabelling. And then we move into a ministerial dialogue, and at the end of that dialogue, I'll try and open up the floor to some questions. We will then close with remarks from the Greenland Minister. So you can tell there are quite a lot of ministers here. And I have to say that when I worked at one point for the UK Environment Minister, she had a very harsh technique for dealing with ministers who were speaking for too long. She had this enormous clock that she placed in front of her desk, and she would literally just simply cut them off. But I won't be quite that harsh, but I will try and keep time. It'll be plenty of time for interaction. Let me invite our Norwegian Minister for the Environment up to give us some welcoming remarks. Board.
Thank you very much, and let me all welcome you to this event on behalf of the Nordic Council of Ministers and UNEP. And let me start by telling you about my first encounter with the swan. Is there anyone here who has no clue what the swan is? Okay, the swan is a Nordic eco-label. Does anyone have a product maybe here with the swan on it they can hold up and show? I'll continue. If anyone has a product with the swan, hold it up and show it. Anyway, this is back in 1990. I'm a very young man. This is the year I'm moving out of my parents' house. And like other young men, I start washing my own clothes on a regular basis because I'm moving to Oslo. And what do? Well, I look at the commercials on TV, and there's a commercial for a washing powder called Omo Color. And I go and buy this washing powder, and they have this logo, which is a swan. At least that's what I'm thinking. But then what happens is that in the months after, I discovered that many other products, or some other products, also have this logo, the swan. And of course, stupid me, understand that this is not a logo, it's an eco-label. But then just a few months ago, I found out, or I learned, that Omo Color was the first Norwegian product, actually, to have the eco-label, the swan, on it. And it was in 1990. So I wasn't so stupid after all. And Lilleborg, who produces Omo Color, have had to change the content of their product 7 times since 1990. Because they had to do it to live up to the standards of the eco-label, the swan. So it has actually worked, because it has made a more environmentally friendly product. And while no one knew about the swan in 1990, today the swan in Norway is one of the brands that most people know about and that they trust in. So the swan has become a Nordic eco-label success. What we are going to discuss here today is a broader picture of this single Nordic experience, because sustainable development cannot be achieved unless we manage to integrate the social as well as environmental wealth and costs, not only in our thinking, but our real economy. And what we have all been discussing here in Rio is in a way about that. And I'm sure many of you think in the same way as I. We would have liked to see even more concrete results from this meeting. But we have also made some important steps forward. And Ida and others who have fought for all these steps know that there are quite a few important processes and tracks that might lead in a good direction in the years ahead. We have agreed here, or we are going to agree, I should be saying, hopefully. First, to decide on important programs on sustainable consumption and production. We have agreed to start working on integrating the natural capital into GDP under the UN, which is, I think, really important to start working more seriously with. And we have agreed to further work on corporate sustainability reporting, which is also an issue that is connected to what we are discussing today. Ecolabelling is a small but important step in this direction. It's by addressing the little steps and concrete tools that we are going to succeed in delivering in the end. And ecolabelling and public procurement together provides an incredibly powerful tool, like we have experienced in the Nordic countries, from a very small start to a quite well-known and well-working ecolabel. The Nordic Council of Ministers is, together with UNEP, our great partner in this issue and so many other issues, now also working with countries like in South America, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, on discussing how to go further on and also on how our experiences can be used by these countries. And this event is about taking that a step further. So again, I welcome you heartily and hope that we can have a real great discussion here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'm going to invite Fanny to come up, who's from UNEP, and I'll just end some remarks. Minister, you've been Minister for Environment for 12 weeks, I think I've calculated, so you've really got a handle on your brief pretty quickly to come here. And thank you for telling us about how the swan has spread its wings and is really taking flight. I'm now going to leave us over to Fanny de Massieu, who's from UNEP, and who is a real expert when it comes to both ecolabelling and sustainable public procurement. Fanny, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. It's really a pleasure for me to be with you today, and I'm impressed by the number of people who've come to attend that side event, and thank you very much for your interest in this very important topic. Okay, next one, please. The transition to a more sustainable development model of development and the transition to a green economy needs a transformational policy approach to build enabling frameworks and also capacities to enable such a transformation. Information is a key part of this transformational policy that are needed, and the management of environmental information, of the information of the sustainability impact of a product is crucial to help identify, interpret, and address critical areas for improvement. In order to do this, it's necessary to measure impacts along the product chain. It is important to do this using a life cycle approach to avoid solving a problem at one stage of the product by creating one at another stage of a product. It's also crucial to use this because it's not only happening in the life cycle in one product phase to another, it can also happen, create a product from one country to another one. Next one, please. As you can see here, everything is interconnected. We all know that. So when you look at a country, it can look very, very resource efficient if you only look at that national environment. But when you start looking at the country and this environmental impact, you do understand that a country that looks resource efficient because it's based on services, when you start looking at all the environmental impacts it generates by importing its products, then the picture is really completely different. And product sustainability information is a way to unpack this complexity and communicate information to the consumer. Next one, please. The value of the information lies in its availability to the consumer and in the fact that it's communicated in a transparent and understandable way. Next one, please. Ecolabels are key in this respect as they make information available to consumers. They help governments in their procurement policies. They help companies improve their performance in the supply chain by identifying where the environmental impacts are the most critical. And it also helps consumers making their purchasing decision and purchasing choices. So they communicate sustainability at all stages of our society to all decision makers when it comes to product, being consumers, companies, but also governments. The fact that certification is third-party certified, the fact that eco-labels are generated by public organizations and by governments, and hence the trust that consumers can have in the sustainability of a product. And that trust is key, as was highlighted before by the Minister of Norway, because you have all seen that proliferation of labels, certifications, and different logos in the product. So what we need is eco-labels that are credible and labels like the Nordics one, like the German Blue Angel, provide that credibility to the consumer. Next one, please. Can you come back to the previous one, sorry? So how do we move from having that one little green product on that shelf to actually having that shelf full of green products? Because this is the challenge we are facing today. I understand that in the Nordic countries, you find a lot of green products with the Swan, but in lots of other countries, it's very difficult to find green products on the shelves. So how do we increase demand? How do we increase supply? Next one, please. This is where procurement and public procurement comes into the picture because it can enhance significantly the demand for sustainable products. Next one, please. You see here the size of public procurement budget compared to GDP in various countries. So you can see here that the fact that in the OECD, 17% of the GDP is actually resulting from public expenditure shows to you that looking at the government not as a regulator, but as a consumer, can tremendously enhance the demand for green products. Sustainable public procurement is the way to actually dynamize the entire society and moves towards a transition towards a green economy. Next one, please. Why implement sustainable public procurement? Well, you implement sustainable public procurement because you want to enhance that demand for sustainable products. But by doing so, what you are doing is you are moving the entire society together with you because you are actually developing standards and information and labels that are going to help the consumers and the private sector to manage their supply chain and the consumer to do their choice. You're providing that information that helps governments procure, but you're also providing the right information to help consumers buy. So public procurement is not only the fact of buying, it's a fact that the government starts playing its role model in providing an impetus to the overall society. By moving towards sustainable public procurement, governments also need to start talking to their supplier base. They need to start talking to the industry. And then we come to not a command and control role, but we come to the co-generation of innovative solutions, of innovative products. And that is key to transitioning towards green economy. So beyond the environmental impact of sustainable public procurement, you've got that stimulation, that accelerating role towards transitioning to a green economy that goes in the overall society. Next one, please. This is what shows in its graph. You've got the public sector, which influences its own market share. Then you've got the example that motivates consumers and company. And then you've got the overall market that adapts through price effects and increased sustainable development and sustainable standards. Next one, please. implementing sustainable public procurement doesn't go without any challenge. In UNEP, we've been working with 7 developing countries in trying to develop a methodology to see how we could help them implement sustainable public procurement. And we see a lot of challenges here that I've tried to summarize in this slide. Some of the challenges lie with the limited availability of sustainable products. Another challenge lies, for example, in the limited access of SMEs to green public procurement. Eco-labeling is key in order to actually increase the supply of sustainable public sustainable goods. Next one, please. SCP and eco-labels, interlinkages. Of course, my point here is when coming to this side event is to show to you how sustainable public procurement and eco-labeling policies generated at the same time can be mutually reinforcing. Some of the benefits and co-benefits are highlighted below, are highlighted on this slide. By promoting eco-labels, you are developing criteria for sustainable products. And one of the major obstacles to sustainable public procurers lies in the difficulties that procurers are encountering when defining the criteria of what a sustainable product is. You have procurers who have always bought the same supply, always bought the same goods, and then suddenly they are asked to define what a sustainable product is. And eco-label, the fact that you have eco-labeled products which already have these sustainable criteria developed really is a tremendous help for them to move towards sustainable public procurement. The fact that you're developing at the same time an eco-label portfolio and sustainable public procurement means that you can really mutually reinforce benefits because you can prioritize the products that you're buying at the government level to match the eco-label product that you're developing. So you can actually increase synergies and have quick benefits. No, please, back. The third benefit of actually developing procurement policy and eco-label policy at the same time is what I was talking about before. By developing sustainable public procurement, you've got to start discussing with your supplier base. And so you have to do the same thing when developing an eco-label. So by doing sustainable public procurement and eco-labeling policies at the same time, okay, it has a life on its own, right? By developing both policies at the same time, you're actually having that dialogue which is inclusive, which is looking at the two sides of the coin. The fourth benefit, of course, is when you are in a developing country, it's very difficult to ask your supplier to straight away produce eco-label goods. So sustainable public procurement has that flexibility that it can decide to focus on one sustainability criteria as opposed to focusing on all of them at the same time. So you can have a progressive approach by moving towards sustainable public procurement using the good work done by the eco-label when developing their criteria. Next one, please. Next one, please. Next one, please. Examples here. I thought I would share with you two experiences that are not Nordic because I know that you're going to hear about it at length during the side event. I mean, in Korea, you can see now, we could see after the introduction of mandatory green public procurement by public institutions, a tremendous increase of the number of products certified by companies. So now you've got more than 7,000 products which are certified, which is really a direct result of the fact that Korea has adopted mandatory green public procurement. In the European Union, you now have an EU eco-label which has 26 product groups which covers the best 10 or 20% of each product category. And here the way they've organized the green public procurement as a two-track approach, one which is really the basic one, having basic environmental criteria, and the other one, which is optional, is to actually have more comprehensive criteria that can be the ones of the EU eco-label. However, one of the problems in the European Union at this stage is that it's not authorized in any public procurement policy to actually say that you are requiring an eco-label. So what procurers have to do is actually look at all the sustainable criteria of the eco-label and put them in their procurement. So what the European Union is looking at the moment is try to actually revise their procurement policy and revise their eco-labeling policy at the same time so that they are mutually supportive. Next one, please. As we've said before, and has been said before, there is a proliferation of eco-label and certification scheme around the world, which is confusing consumers on the one hand, but which is also confusing producers. If you are producing a good and you're exporting it, and you have to answer to very different sustainability criteria from one country to another, it makes it very, very difficult for you to organize your supply chain and to produce this good. It's also a barrier for SMEs who are all the more really unable to address that complexity. So the one option and one interesting level of integration that we are seeing is really the sub-regional or regional dimension, promoting, I would say, harmonization of labels, or at least mutual recognition of eco-label and their criteria, is a way to enable consumers to, who have very often in the same sub-region similar consumption patterns, and also a way to provide suppliers with a core of criteria for each product that they will be able to supply more easily. Another benefit here is, of course, that this can reinforce regional integration, because you've got more easily flow of products between one country to another. So this is improving trade flows between a region. At least this is our assumption. There are a number of examples worldwide of such regional integration. Very, I would say, some which have a good history, a good track record, such as the Nordic region, such as the European Union. There is also an emerging African eco-label mechanism, which is an interesting attempt of the Africa region to actually constitute such an eco-label. And you also, I hope, will soon have an attempt by the Southern Cone countries to do so. I hope that the debate today will help us to further identify the potential of moving towards such regional integration and understanding the benefits of such approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fanny. We have many ministers here, and unfortunately not all of them can stay the whole side event. They have many other duties to get on with, so unfortunately some may have to leave early. Thank you very much. And we are also expecting some people to hopefully rush in from the plenary during our next session. Now I'm going to invite our ministers to come up and take their seats here on the panel. We have quite a remarkable panel, I have to say. Do make your way up, everybody, all the ministers, and I will introduce you. I've never moderated a panel which has such amazingly qualified ministers, let alone anybody really. We've got economists, we've got political scientists, and we've even got a priest.
No, not a priest. Theologian.
A theologian. So it's a fantastic panel we've got here, and we're going to start with a representative from Brazil, the Vice Minister, Ricardo Schaefer. Welcome. I'm going to give you a microphone since you seem to be lacking one just at the moment. There we are. The way this will work is that each minister gets 5 minutes to make their case for sustainable public procurement. I will then throw, hopefully, an interesting and challenging question to them before we move on to the next one. But it's over to you, Ricardo, for the first.
Good evening for everybody. I would like to thank you for United Nations Environment Program and the Nordic Council of Ministers for the invitation for us to join actually the next eco-labeling project, the next phase of the eco-labeling project, which pursues a development of a regional cooperation on eco-labeling and the promotion of a sustainable public procurement. It's important to say that Brazil is since last year we launched our industrial policy named the Plano Brasil Maior, conducted by our Minister of Development, Industry and Foreign Trade. And this policy, this industrial policy, is oriented to enhance industrial competitiveness by increasing productivity, expanding markets, and creating more qualified jobs. But we brought to this policy a sustainable and inclusive economic development target. And this eco-labeling strategy and the sustainable procurement is a very important tool to allow us to bring both aims into this policy. We believe that the regional eco-labeling program may bring together, and I'm talking specifically about the role of Brazil in South America region, could bring together in the region different perspectives, needs, and aspirations of a number of various stakeholders among Latin American and Caribbean countries. And I think it could allow these countries to improve the decision making and produce more sustainability. Recently, on beginning of this month, 5th June, President Dilma Rousseff signed a law 7746, which gives priority to procurement of sustainable goods, and from now on, public procurement in Brazil, and it is an important tool for our industrial policy, must follow some sustainable criteria that are being designed by an interministerial commission led by our Minister of Environmental and Minister of Planning in Brazil, which it's a challenge for us to design this criteria and to bring this perspective into the industrial policy. That's a very important aim, and it's a very challenging law that Ms. Dilma has has brought to us to do, and our challenge is to integrate that in the better way we can do that. And for us, it's very important to discuss, and the cooperation in this field is very important to enhance it, to improve the Brazilian industrial policy as a policy from one ministry within among the other ministries in Brazil. Very briefly, that's what I would like to express, to convey. Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. And I should have said that the Vice Minister, who is from the Development, Industry and Foreign Trade Ministry,
yes,
has jumped into this task really quite at the last minute. So we're
yes,
very grateful that you're here as well.
Thank
you. You gave us a really clear presentation about how overall this is part of an industrial policy, really about development and jobs, but where you see sustainable public procurement and taking a lead in the region on ecolabelling can be a crucial part of it. I mean, it's hugely impressive that you're making sustainable procurement a priority. It's remarkable. Can you tell us a little bit about how you think that this collection, this integrated collection of industrial policy, sustainable public procurement and ecolabelling can create jobs, can create new development, either in Brazil or in the region? How could that happen, do you think?
You know, creating jobs in Brazil, in the region, is a challenge in itself. It's a very huge task for us. I think the most important thing is to define those criteria, in my point of view, because all countries among Latin America countries are pursuing the aim of creating jobs and creating better life for its populations. And but I think the challenge is how to do that, respecting the environment, bringing more sustainable practice. I think this is more the challenge in the region is how to do that. It's hard to answer your question, and but I think if we can change the mindsets, and I think when we look at the region, we see that every single country now has a specific industrial policy, and I think if we can bring this perspective to the governments, to the public policymakers in Latin America, this perspective of integrating both aims, I think it would be a great step forward in a future that we want for our planet.
Thank you very much. You've made a strong case, I think, for the transformative power, driving power of SPP, and when it's integrated, as you say. I'm going to ask the Chilean minister if I could be so bold as to ask her to let Minister from Denmark go first, who I know has to rush off in just under 10 minutes. If you wouldn't mind letting Ida take the floor next. Now, often people think, when is it do you start feeling old? And some people it's when the footballers are younger than them, or you don't understand the music of your children. For me, it's when the environment ministers are younger than you. So over to you, Ida.
Well, thank you very much. I just wanted to sort of put this into the Rio context, why we are discussing this today. I think we could first of all tell a very nice story of why we are going to upgrade UNIP. It's because they can do events like this. It's because they can bring knowledge together, bring regions together. And we also adopted the 10-year framework program for sustainable consumption and production. So I think this side event fits perfectly for what we're doing here in Rio. Another thing that we put on the agenda here in Rio is the concept of green economy. And for me, and for the EU, and for Denmark, green economy is really to understand that when we talk about the 3 pillars of sustainability, environment and the social and economic side, it's not pillars anymore. It's really, we should twist them together and think of them as a DNA. And this should be in the heart of our economies, that we should never do anything where we do not integrate the social and the environmental side into the hearts of the economies. And this also means that ministers of finance and I mean ministers of economy and business and trade should be integrating the social and the environmental side completely into the policies. And this means we need our hands on all the really big wheels that can make this society turn. And actually sustainable public procurement is one of the largest wheels we have. And I mean, in our country it's about 15-18% of the GDP is public procurement. In some countries, developing countries, it's even 40%. So it's a large, huge impact on the development. And this is why it's so important to integrate it. When we talk about eco-labels and talk about public procurement, it's easy to tell the environmental side of the story, right? It's clear. But the social side, I mean, if we buy a product in Denmark and I have the eco-label on it, I can be sure that this has not cost an Indian worker to be poisoned by chlorine, bleached in because the product wasn't bleached in chlorine. So I'm in that side, the social side, at least in the country where the product has been produced, is taken into account in a way that could be developed further, I think, but it's still there also from the health perspective. So I think that is very important to see. That's also part of the eco-labeling. But I would also say that there's also, of course, the economic side to this. And how do we really bring that forward and make it very clear? There are 2 sides. I mean, one is, of course, that I do believe this can create jobs. To make public procurement, where you go for the highest standards, if you go for the eco-label, you inspire innovation. You inspire companies to aspire to go to these eco-labels. This is pretty good way of driving innovation, to say we buy the highest standards, because then this is also what the UNIP representative showed us, that this will make companies wanting to aspire for this place or this label. But it also has another side to it, which is if we take the total cost of ownership into account. And this is a new concept we're starting to work with, total cost of ownership, because often, sometimes at least, eco-label projects can be a little bit more expensive, but if you take the total cost of ownership, it's actually often a better economy also to it. I mean, I can just give a few examples. If in the EU, if all public authorities went for the best toilets and taps, this would, in their buildings, just in the public buildings, this would save them 200 million cubic meters of water. I mean, water's not probably priced everywhere, but it's still pretty a lot of water saved. Or the same thing if all street lighting was the best standard, we would save 64% of the energy used, and that's of course a lot of money saved. So this is the economic side, and I think we have to remember that this is really integrating all 3, and this is the green economy. In Denmark, we've had these products for a long time. We've had a policy for green public procurement for a long time. We are in the EU between the 7 the strongest countries for buying green public procurement. We are going for at least 50% in the EU, but it's a voluntary standard, so we're trying to push this even further. In Denmark, it's actually 90% of the Danes that recognize the eco-label. It's pretty strong. It's strong. I mean, it's like having a second brand on your products. You don't even need to have your own brand famous, because you have this brand. So what Bort said it's actually also the brand, because often you just trust something when you see that. And this is also why you shouldn't have too many, because everybody can invent, let's have sans paraben, without parabens. Or some. Don't take too many brands. Stick to some few, I would say, would be an advice for me. So in Denmark, we've done this. We've taken the next step. We've created partnerships with municipalities so that we challenge them to say, hey, why don't we look each other in the eyes and compete a little bit amongst the municipalities. We just made a new agreement recently in this partnership that we will do new things on transportation, on the housing, and on like detergents for cleaning. And this is, we have a lot of good stories on how this is actually driving or at least becoming savings also from these municipalities if you just take a little longer perspective on things. And I think the public can afford to have a little longer perspective on things, and we can tell people, okay, this might be 5% more expensive today, but if we within the next 3, 4, 5 years save all this money, fine, you know. So I think it's fair to say that this can be done. We've also I think it's very important to remember to use and go into a partnership with the producers to really ask them, how do you best manage your public procurement strategy at home, because they are often the ones that can tell how do you make sure that you get the best products. So I think this is a really interesting area, and it's really one where green economy becomes very concrete, and a place where I think we can see all three pillars integrated as a DNA and really getting into the heart of the economy. So it's not just Ministers of Environment or Development Corporation that talks about green economy, inclusive green economy, or sustainable development, but actually the ministers of finance also. And this, I mean, this conference, we've agreed, so I can say this now. There's been a lot of demonizing of the concept of green economy or inclusive green economy. And some think it's trade barriers, and others, I mean, and it's because we haven't been good enough at explaining that it's really about getting the environment and the social side into the hearts of the economies. And when we talk about economy, our ministers of finance start listening. So this is why we should make Rio a conference, not only for ministers for development cooperation and environment, but also for ministers of finance. And this is why I think it's really good that we stuck to the concept of an inclusive green economy and set a really new standard. And I hope a strong, positive vision will come out of Rio with this concept. And I believe it will be just as important as the Sustainable Development Goals that are actually the same vision, the same philosophy, I think, but expressed in two different ways. So that's a little political statement in the end, since we did agree. So and we didn't have too much political time to discuss what it's actually been agreed. Yeah. But thank you to our host for really being excellent host, and you managed to get us all on board, which was an almost impossible job. So congratulations for that also.
Thank you very much. I know you've got to rush off, but I do have a question. I can't resist. 10 days left until you hand over the presidency of the European Union to the Cypriots. Can I ask a question? Because you place SPP, Sustainable Public Procurement, really at the heart of making an inclusive green economy real. We heard about Korea. They've got mandatory targets. We heard about the EU. They're voluntary. They're 50%. We're not reaching them at the current rate. Do we need mandatory targets in the EU?
Well, I can answer in 10 days. But if you ask me after the 1st of July, I would say yes. But let's see. I mean, so I haven't answered that question yet. But we actually managed during our presidency to adopt council conclusion in this room. Sorry for being technical. It means that the ministers agree on something and ask the Commission to come forward with a proposal. And we have now set the way forward for our 7th environmental action program, which is actually the transition towards a green economy. And we will do this. No matter what we agree and whatever, we will go back home and do this. Because we believe it's right, we believe it's better for our economies, for our people. We think it's better for the planet, for the children to come. So we will do this. And I think one of the most important vehicles will be also public procurement or sustainable procurement, because the private sector has a large role to play. I mean, if Unilever and Walmart said, we don't want to buy fish that are not sustainably fished, because we know that this is hitting the poorest people the hardest, because the fish are gone, they're what they live off, this would have maybe an even larger impact than what all we ministers could agree on, you know? So I think we should start maybe just talking about sustainable procurement, because the private sector really, really can play a large role here. So,
thank you very much. And now we'll go back to our original order, and I would like to introduce the Minister of the Environment for Chile, Maria Ignacia Benitez Pereira. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much for this invitation. And I would like some experience we have in Chile about eco-labeling. And I will say that in the last few years, an important increase of eco-label certification system and sustainability codes from the public and private sectors has been developed in the last few years. Some examples of these measures are the Blue Star, that is a logo from the National Council on Clean Production, the National System of Certification for Firewood, a key topic in Chile due to its massive use for heating in the southern part of the country, and the Chilean Agency of Energy Efficiency, which has consumer guidebook on energy labeling. Also, our country has as well 3 official policies on energy efficiency for several electric devices, and recently introduced an energy efficiency eco-label for lightweight cars. Chile Compra, which is in charge of the public procurement system, has added a sustainability criteria. And moreover, our country developed a green public procurement policy as a joint effort between the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Finance, with the UNEP support already. Carbon footprint is a key topic for Chile, and the Santiago Chamber of Commerce is leading since 2010 a strategy oriented towards productive sectors. The public sector has moved ahead as well, creating an office for climate change issues in the Ministry of Environment, which is assessing different scenarios and mitigation measures to achieve our national goals. The forestry industry has developed 2 certifications which are easily applied by larger companies. But for the smaller ones, this has been a costly and complicated procedure, and therefore more time is needed to reach positive results. Also, the winery industry has a sustainability code. Additionally, the Ministry of Housing is promoting sustainability practice in the construction sector, and the Ministry of Agriculture has a national system of certification for organic products. So, as you can appreciate, there are several eco-labeling related activities taking place in Chile, although we require a better coordination of these initiatives and international validation of environmental criteria. In that respect, it is necessary to reflect on the difference in cultural, economic, and social conditions between developed and developing countries. High standards of economic and social well-being facilitate the demand for certified ecological products. In Chile, the economic capacity to pay a high price for an ecological product is still limited to for many people. Environmental concern is very low. Nonetheless, the Ministry of Environment has as a main goal to assure that every citizen has the right to access environmental information. These are important challenges, but they also imply opportunities. It is therefore important to count with credible and understandable information for consumers and producers, as with support for a small and medium enterprise. These challenges would be better assumed if cooperation among our countries is promoted. This will facilitate the process of implementing a regional label and the access of products from the region to foreign markets that are actively requiring sustainability criteria such as Europe and North America. If we can open new markets for our products, recognize environmental efforts, we will be halfway towards creating a greener economy, and we'll have more informed consumers. For that reason, it is necessary that public sector supports to these schemes, so the credibility of an eco-label will be much higher. So national government should be an actor in the market and actively participate in the process of applying an eco-label, reviewing criteria, and commenting on the proposed regulation. That's what I would like to say. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. I have a question, actually, which I think is stimulated by what you've just said, which is that, is it right, am I right in understanding that you see one of the advantages, one of the opportunities that we're going to be seizing with eco-labelling, really to do with placing Chile and products produced in Chile onto an international market, a market that's perhaps demanding more swans or eco-labels? Is that part of the strategy that you have?
Yes, there is a strategy because we export a lot of products, so we have to be to work in that way, because when you are a country that main of your incomes comes from exportations, you have to add value, and when you have eco-labeling in many products, you add value, and I think that's a goal we have to reach. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We're going to welcome another minister. Welcome. Thanks very much for making it here. I noticed when I got the program for this that this program has the most complicated or difficult to pronounce names on it, and I'm going to try and get this right. Ville Niinistö. Welcome. You have your 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. That's perfect, perfectly pronounced. So I hope we implement the results of Rio Declaration as well as you pronounce my name. Yeah, if we look today at what kind of challenges we are facing, I think the key is that we have a kind of an economic development that doesn't take into account the very visible and actual social costs and environmental costs that are there. And we have scientific solutions. We have a number of companies that have products that are already very viable and economically smart products. But what we need is not just make ambitious targets on sustainable development and sustainable development goals. We also have to get rid of the barriers we have in regulation that actually hinder these kind of products to come into the markets. So when we look at solutions to sustainable development, I think it's very important that we step up our policies when it comes to the governments as a role model going into sustainable development. And if we look at government spending, public procurement is one of the key areas where we can actually make a difference already today. And quite often public procurement methods are such that they hinder development instead of encourage it. So just by changing that dynamic, we achieve a lot. And we have tried to do that work in Finland in the last 5 or 10 years, and we were very much active already in Johannesburg in the program for sustainable consumption and production, which is now a new 10-year plan, was one of the things that we are going to adopt here also in Rio, and I'm very glad about that, because it's clear that by changing the patterns of consumption and production, we can create a kind of economic model which is in the long term sustainable. And at the moment we are using resources in a way which is not going to last for very many decades. So we have stepped up our approaches in getting more from less wisely, and that's the name of our new national program for sustainable production and consumption. And public procurement is one big part of that program, and we have several suggestions that, in that proposal for new steering instruments and concrete pilot project for low carbon and resource efficient future. And we have also, before that program, we have taken a resolution at government level a few years ago on greening the public procurement with concrete targets, that how much by which year needs to be of public product. For example, the central government has a goal that at least 30% of purchased electricity will be produced from renewable sources by 2010, and this is now counted if that's true, and at least 60% by 2015. And all government buildings that are new, under renovation or lease must be passive by 2015. So that's quite an ambitious target when you look at the costs of heating in a country like Finland. And government expects that these measures from public procurement actually increase national economic development as well, because it's a way of getting into markets the kind of products that are produced and our researchers have developed, that we create home markets for new products, and then you get exports after that. So public procurement can be a vehicle for economic growth into the green economy model, and at the same time we diminish the amount of used energy and resource efficiency in our public works. And the aim is also to change the patterns in transport and work in buildings, and I would like to also include that we don't just think about the buildings when we look at how we get buildings more energy efficient. We look at also how we work in those buildings in state functions, because you can nowadays quite a few people work a lot by different information communications channels, but we still have a kind of an idea that workplace is a place where you go 8 o'clock in the morning and leave 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or in some other countries different hours, but still. And what we are trying to do is that we create better leadership in public offices, that people can also work distance some days a week, and you limit transportation costs and make it easier to get the children from kindergarten, for example, in some days. So it's also flexible with their private lives, and you need less space in these buildings as well if you have more flexible hours for the employees to work. So not just public procurement, but you need also direct public works more efficiently. And we have also a lot of municipalities that have taken budgeting on sustainable development as one of their focus areas. My hometown of Turku, for example, has set in the city council in its annual budget targets on emission cuts and energy efficiency for each entity, as well as it encourages sustainable procurement. So our experience in Finland is that you need to have measurable targets, you need to have indicators, you need to have goals that direct all the work you're doing in the public sector, and then you can follow on the effectiveness, how those are implemented in the work. And it's clear that these communities that have done this kind of work have actually benefited from it economically. And we have 5 municipalities which have taken part in a low-carbon community project. And I will take one of these communities as an example, Uusikaupunki, which has 20,000 inhabitants. They have gone through all the work of the community and companies within the municipality and their schooling system, and gone through on how to change consumption and production patterns to more sustainable forms of production. And they have curbed carbon emissions in just 3 years by 17%, and they have created more than 300 jobs in clean technology in the community of 20,000 people. Because the companies have gone through how they use materials, for example, they have saved money, and they have become more efficient, and they have created products that are popular in the markets. So what I would like to also emphasize is that you can also make public projects where the private companies are involved, that they are also vehicles for change because they are the ones who innovate the solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ville. I want to just pick up on three things very quickly that you said and then ask a question. I thought it was very interesting that you talked not only about the what of sustainable public procurement, but how you do it. Maybe that means changing working patterns in order to reduce the amount of space that's required, heating that's required, energy that's required. I think that's a very interesting aspect that isn't captured so much just now in some of the thinking about SPP. So I think that's a really important element. And then you also talked about the ability to open new markets. And I think that, again, the simple scale of public procurement does allow you to act almost as an investor, if you like, to try and get innovations through that period where there's very low uptake to a stage where actually they're sort of not a niche market, but a mainstream, something that everybody can use. But I particularly wanted just to pick up on the point you made about needing to have measurable targets and indicators, and ask you, in that context, do you have a particular hopes for the new 10-year plan that's set out in the document that we're talking about here?
Well, I think it's important that we also, at the global level, we look at the kind of total effectiveness of the actions we are doing. That we have indicators and measurements that measure the total use of resources. That we don't go into just to small sectors and there we have to spread best practices and so on. But then we have to look at how we change the total of our consumption and production patterns at the global level, that we don't just green a small part of consumption, that we actually, it's better to diminish 5% of energy use in whole of the economy than 90% in just 1% of the economy. So I think it's important that we find these kind of measurements and indicators that work with that in that fashion as well. But then I would like to also say that smart solutions are there today, and just about being smart and making them usable. For example, when it comes to sustainable cities, you save a lot of money by planning cities better. Just to be short.
Thank you. That's great. I'm sure there's plenty to come back to. And I'm going to hand over now to our last ministerial speaker. Welcome, and I will again try and get the pronunciation correct since I've done it okay so far. Svandis Svavarsdottir. Welcome. Your 5 minutes start now.
Thank you very much, dear moderator, dear ministerial colleagues and ladies and gentlemen. It is of great pleasure for me to participate in this event of ecolabelling and green public procurement, important sustainability issues that have been of high political priority during my tenure as the Icelandic Minister for the Environment since 2009. This is a field where I believe that Iceland can tell an interesting story, reflecting on our experience and progress with implementation of these instruments last few years. Although Iceland has been a partner in the Nordic Swan eco-label from the beginning, the Swan was for long of low flying, so to speak, or even neglected priority in Iceland, both politically and administratively. This simply resulted in few Icelandic companies taking up the Swan label and relatively low public awareness about the label in general, comparing to other countries in the north, in the other Nordic countries. But in 2009, interestingly, in the middle of the economic crisis in Iceland after the great blow, the Icelandic government decided to put a great effort into these two sustainability instruments, This was realized with the implementation of our first governmental strategy on green public procurement, and further putting a great emphasis on the Swan eco-label within our administration. This joint venture had a rapid and a positive effect and proved that both Icelandic consumers and producers were ready and perceptive to adopt these instruments following the governmental facilitation. This resulted in active and effective GPP strategy that is now jointly executed by the central government and the largest municipalities. And in this period of 3 years, we have seen a 6- or 7-fold increase in the number of Swan labeled producers of different goods and services. 6- or 7-fold in 3 years. And there is further a long list of aspirant companies that are eager to adopt the Swan as soon as possible. Also, we had a significant increase in public awareness. Annual surveys show that the majority of the Icelandic people now know what the Swan eco-label stands for. And that's quite a change. I can state that this has been well received by the private sector, and it is appreciated that the role of the public sector is to provide clear and reliable instruments to facilitate a guide the private sector towards sustainability. What is further interesting is that this development has been happening during the turbulent times in the Icelandic economy. As you might know, the collapse of the Icelandic banking sector in 2008 took the Icelandic economy into deep recession that we are only just now picking up from. Perhaps society becomes more concerned, that's maybe one of the answers, about sustainability in times of crisis, realizing that our production and consumption has to be based on sound and lasting foundations that does not jeopardize our own future and coming generations' possibilities. That's one way of explaining what happened. I would therefore like to sum up by highlighting 5 issues that were important for successful and rapid implementation of eco-labelling and GPP in Iceland. First, availability of sound and reliable instruments. It is necessary to have available and trustworthy instruments. It's very important. There, the regional cooperation has been of seminal importance with the joint effort in the Nordic Swan and regional collaboration on GPP. Number 2, political commitment and leadership. As both instruments are governmental, there has to be a political commitment and will to put this on the agenda and secure the necessary follow-up. Number 3, effective public administration in the field. Both these instruments have to be effectively governed by the respective public authorities in good partnership with the private sector. In Iceland, the responsibility for both has been within the same governmental authority, which has in our case proven to be efficient. Number 4, interplay between green public procurement and eco-labelling. There are important synergistic effects between these two that act as positive drivers for both systems. And number 5, good times versus bad times. These days, many economies are struggling worldwide. The Icelandic story tells that such periods are not at all bad to place an increased focus on eco-labelling and green public procurement. Actually, such times might be beneficial for increased focus on sustainable production and consumption. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you for ending on such a fantastically positive note as well. I'm now standing in front of people, but fantastic. And I just want to mention, in the period that you were talking about, I was looking at some of the figures, and the household consumption index fell. So it just fell off a cliff, frankly. It was down by something like 30%. It was quite extraordinary. So that you managed and succeeded and found real success in this strategy is quite remarkable. Now we're sort of running out of time. We have some closing remarks to come, but we also have the voice of the consumer here. And I'd like to give the voice of the consumer the opportunity to pose a question or say something.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I am Lisa Gam from the Brazilian Consumer Organization, an NGO, EDEC. And I really welcome this initiative because one of our demands in Rio Plus 20, we elaborated together with other consumer NGOs around the world a platform of demands on sustainable consumption. And one of the proposals is exactly on access to information, to guarantee that consumers have information on products and services. And we would like to have mandatory labeling. But I welcome the joint venture between the Nordic Council of Ministers and the UNEP, along with Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, and Uruguay. And I really hope that this leads to a South America eco-labeling program. I also congratulate the Nordic countries by the evolution of the Nordic eco-label that is including now social issues into account, considering the sustainability context. And because of our social context in South America and our expectation to guarantee that all consumers, including the poor, have access to sustainable products and services, I would like to ask you about what are the strategies to guarantee that eco-label products have accessible prices to the poor and are not niche market.
That's a great question. Do we have anyone offering an answer quickly? Yes, Ville.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and one of the keys we have to make environmental responsibility a mainstream for everybody, and it has to be part of the question of fighting against inequality. And there we have done a lot of work in Finland with companies that they instead, what they still did a few years ago, that they see it as a niche market and they take extra price from the product, that now they instead see it as a kind of get consumers into the affair, and that has been a good change in the balance. That actually, if you also educate people that if you buy products that are raw materials, you buy the actual vegetables and so on, it's cheaper even with sustainable labels than buying industrialized products which have been manufactured in a longer process, which are more costly. And we have actually done research that poor people in Finland, even though poor in Finland is relative, but poorer people actually use more money into food than the people who are middle-income people who are more informed on the costs of the product. So information is big part, and labeling and access to information is very vital for fighting against inequality.
Thank you. Maria, would you like to say something about this? You did mention it in your speech as well, I think.
Well, I think for our region it's going to be more difficult that all people have access to eco-label products. But it's a process, and I think we have to, we need the hope that we are going to win this battle, so keep in mind that.
I'm going to invite Palle Christensen from the Minister for Environment in Greenland to come to give us some closing remarks. And while he takes the stage, I'm just going to say that it sounds to me like also in terms of getting the prices right, we're going to need to make sure that the whole life cycle is included in order to make the prices of non-eco-labelled goods higher, if you like, to take account of any damage they cause to the environment. But some closing remarks, and then I'd like to ask you, we will be playing a film just as we close up here, so you'll be able to see a film as you make your way out today.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Palle Christensen. I'm the Minister of Education, Research and Nordic Cooperation from Greenland, and I used to be the Minister of Finance and Taxation. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to give some closing remarks in this fantastic seminar. I have been looking forward to it ever since I came to Rio. But instead of calling them closing remarks, I would rather call them the remarks on how we move on from here. Because eco-labeling should not stop by this seminar. This is the new beginning, at least from what we can do here in South America. It is very important that eco-labeling is focused in 3 areas: among politicians, among consumers, and among the industry, because they can all win by eco-labeling their products. It is very easy for the politicians, for us who are the members of the government, to actually decide that eco-labeling should be put into action. And why not take the easy decisions first? We make so many difficult decisions in our government, so let's take some of the easy ones. In the beginning, the Norwegian minister said that eco-labeling is just a little thing, but it has a great impact. And I would actually allow myself to disagree a little with him, because eco-labeling is a big thing. If eco-labeling was just a little thing, this room would not have been filled with ministers. So, just when you see all these ministers, this is a signal from the governments that this is something that we want to do worldwide. I was happy to hear about the great work that is being done in UNEP. And we have heard that some of the negotiations here in Rio was about how to move on with UNEP. And as we could hear from the from Chile, it is good that they can cooperate with organizations like UNEP. And I'm glad that we could hopefully put extra funds into UNEP in the forthcoming years, so that we can help even more countries in even more areas than we do today. And I was delighted to hear what they did in Chile, that they have actually eco-labeled things that I could not do, like eco-labeling the housing and all that. That was, yeah. What we did in Greenland a couple of years ago was that we put this into action when I was Minister of Finance. And as a little country like Greenland, what do we do? Or what did we do? We looked at some of the old Nordic countries to see how did they do it and which country did it with very great success. And what we did was that we looked at Finland. They have been doing this for like 30 years and they're doing very, very well. So we just put it into action in Greenland, and it's, as Ida Auken said, the Danish minister, we have put it in the area of the Minister of Finance. So everything we do in Greenland has an edge of not eco-labeling, but sustainable development in all that we do. When we do something in Greenland, it has to be economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable. And that's a good beginning. And I think that if we have to be able to give some of our experiences to other countries, that would be one of the advices that we will give. And when we attend meetings like this, we would like to hear from others, and we would like to tell what we know. So I'm glad that we hear from Brazil that they want to do more into eco-labeling. And I understand as a Nordic minister that they would like some kind of assistance in that matter. And I would be more than delighted to go back to my colleagues in the Nordic Council of Ministers to tell them that we can actually do something extra by making alliance with Brazil, so that we can help each other by eco-labeling as much as possible. Because in the Nordic countries there's a lot of experience regarding legislation and how to put all this into action so that it actually works. So if that is something that I'm allowed to put up to my colleagues in the Nordic countries, I will certainly do that. We have a broad range of criteria designs depending on what kind of products we want to make or we want to produce. So it's very easy to copy that and put that into action. What we should do from now on is actually what, once again, Finland said. We have done a lot until now. We have to rethink how to do for the future, because we are getting more and more challenged in this area because everything develops so very fast. So I was happy to hear that Finland said that we have to make global measurements. so that we have to make our regional projects even bigger. If we can have similar eco-labeling in South America, in Africa, in Asia, it would be much easier for the industry to get this eco-label. And if it's easy to them, it's easy for the consumers. Like UNEP said, how can we make it difficult for the consumers to get non-green products? And I think that's a very important angle to put on that. Another important thing is that, like Ida said from Denmark, that all members of government should understand that they have to put this policy into action in their area of responsibility. It cannot only be the Minister of Finance or the Minister of Environment. It has to be all of them. And the rest of the Parliament have to understand that as well, even though that's sometimes a little bit more difficult. So I would say that one of the coming goals for the Nordic Council of Ministers is to make new goals for us, and one of them will be how can we teach the consumers to demand this from the industry and from the politicians, because we have to be challenged all the time. If not, nothing will happen. So please challenge all your governments at all time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Palle, Minister for Nordic Cooperation. And thank you to all of our guests, ministers here today. I think they deserve a round of applause. I'm afraid we're having to close the meeting now, but thank you very much for a really stimulating discussion.